Welcome everyone to this. Thank you. Welcome everyone to this Gobeshona conference session on cash transfers and locally led action on loss and damage. We've got an excellent list of speakers today and a great opportunity for us to reflect on what is an emerging, vital, important issue to the loss and damage debate internationally. As many of you will know, at COP26 in Glasgow, the Scottish Government became the first developed country in the world ever to commit funding for loss and damage. This announcement was said to break the taboo on the issue of loss and damage finance and certainly made a significant contribution to the progress which has subsequently been made on the issue of loss and damage finance at the global level. The decision in Egypt to establish the Loss and Damage Fund at COP27, and then the operationalization of that fund at COP28 in Dubai last year. Now, as many of you will know, whilst the fund was operationalized in Dubai.
Sorry, I was in the call for a few. Sorry.
Can I just ask people? Oh, hold on, I can do the muting myself. Great. So as many of you will know, the Loss and Damage Fund at the international level was operationalized in Dubai. However, the next step is we're waiting to hear from the World Bank if they will be able to meet all of the agreements and the requirements which were put on them in order to be in charge of the fund. And one of those is related to the topic we'll be discussing today. That's the issue of direct access for communities. Because as we know, when you have big global funds at the international level, often the bureaucracy involved and the nature of governance of such funds is so great that actually they can be very, very far away from the needs of people on the front lines of climate change, who we as practitioners are most concerned about. And it's in that context that we are having this discussion today, in particular about cash transfers. So, as many of you will know, cash transfers are becoming an increasingly popular method of supporting communities, especially within the loss and damage area, when we're seeing more and more climate disasters affecting communities in the very short term. Cash transfers are a way of getting money out quickly, getting support out quickly to the people who need it most. They are seen as an empowering means of enabling communities to have locally led responses to those loss and damage that they need. And in particular, I think today we're going to reflect on the concept of loss and damage as in some ways contributing to reparations for the injustice of climate change, which communities, especially in the global south, are suffering from. So that's a bit of the context, and we have a number of speakers here who have been involved in implementing programmes with support from the Scottish Government's first loss and damage funding, each of which has a component of cash transfers in it. And we're going to learn a little bit from each of those speakers about the experience of loss and damage within their own communities, about their own organisation's response to those loss and damage needs, and specifically how and why they think cash transfers are an effective means of responding to those needs. Each speaker will speak for around 10 minutes, and then we will have an opportunity for a dialogue, for Q&A amongst all of you, the attendees. If you have a question, feel free to put it into the chat as it comes into your head. That's fine. I'm going to make a note of it. But equally, once all the speakers have spoken, I will open up the floor for people to either make an oral contribution by raising your hand on Zoom or by putting another question into the chat at that point. So I think there's nothing further ado, but just to say this session is being recorded for people who can't make it, and we'll be sharing this widely afterwards. We will also be reporting on this session as part of the wider reporting of the whole Gobeshona conference, but also capturing a lot of the learning for all of us in our own communications and advocacy work in relation to loss and damage. So that's all from me. So I'm going to pass on to our first speaker, who is Richard Kuseni from Caritas Malawi. He's a humanitarian practitioner there. He's been instrumental working for CADICOM, Caritas Malawi, in designing their humanitarian responses, especially for recent cyclones, Anna, Gombe, and Freddie. And he is going to talk about some of the recent work which has been funded through the Scottish Government's Humanitarian Emergency Fund. I'll pass over to you, Richard, for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. Indeed, my name is Richard Kuseni, as Ben has already introduced me. I'm from Caritas Malawi. I work as a monitoring and evaluation expert, and also lead in the humanitarian programs at Caritas Malawi. So if you allow me, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to be talking about some of the interventions, of course, providing a bit of a background to the interventions that CADICOM or Caritas Malawi are implementing, and of course, with support from the Scottish Government through the Scottish Catholic International Aid Fund. So let me share my screen. Okay, so quickly, I think in terms of the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about, of course, the introduction and the background to the interventions that we are doing. I'm just also going to talk a little about our work and the organizations and our relation with the Scottish Catholic International Aid Fund. And just a brief overview of the social protection programming in Malawi, where social cash transfers fall under at the same time. And then I'll take you through the extent of the food crisis, which is the immediate kind of support that we are providing as at the moment with support from the Scottish Government. And then I'll zero into the actual intervention that we are doing currently this month of March, aiming to finalize the intervention by the 31st of March, at least for the immediate food crisis support through the cash transfers. And then as we're doing that, I think you would agree with me that as we are responding, we sort of kind of keep on getting climate-related disasters, while still trying to respond to one, mitigate the other, but we keep on getting these. And then we'll also kind of like talk a little about some of the emerging issues and some of the gaps that we have identified as a result of the current disasters. So that's pretty much the presentation outline. So as a matter of background, I think, as you might appreciate, Malawi has been termed as the warm heart of Africa, where I think we've been known to, I mean, it has been known of its kind people, jovial people, its numerous, unique tourism areas, including Lake Malawi, and the uniqueness of some of the species like the tilapia, the chambo, so all that. But somehow over time we kind of like, losing that kind of name. It has not the country is not as warm anymore due to some of the kind of persistent disasters that have eventually led to people losing hope, a feeling of uncertainty in terms of what is going to come next. So this really has been due to, kind of a series of different types of climate-related disasters, the cyclones, the Idai, and then after Idai, then we faced Gombe, Anna, and then most recently the cyclone Freddie. So this also comes amongst other equally, devastating kind issues, outbreaks. We've had COVID. And then recently, we also had cholera outbreaks, the economic recession, due to the country's deficits and high interest rates, reducing expenditure, prolonged dry spells. So all these having some ripple effects in the agricultural production, which is really a significant issue for Malawians, because Malawi is an agri-based kind of industry with 80% of the population depending on agriculture. So these really have been quite detrimental to the development and livelihood of most communities in Malawi. In January and February 2023, and of course this year as well, 2024, most of the districts pretty much in the southern region have been hit by the cyclones, and then they experienced heavy rains, floods, mudslides. So all these are just adding on the suffering of the communities. So as such, this situation is what has triggered over time immediate support, but at the same time also efforts to build livelihood sustainability among vulnerable populations in the country. So this is just a matter of a background as to how it has taken us to date, and then still demanding for more support if we are to realize a sustainable livelihood for our communities. So Caritas Malawi, just for interest of those that are maybe new to the institution, so Caritas Malawi, also known as the Catholic Development Commission in Malawi, is a development arm of the Bishops' Conference in Malawi, termed as the Episcopal Conference of Malawi, which is the umbrella body of Catholic organizations in Malawi. So Caritas Malawi is just part the humanitarian and relief arm of that. Our focus areas in terms of work include humanitarian response, obviously, in the sectors of food security, or food and nutrition security rather, WASH, health, education, livelihoods. But also we're into climate change mitigation and adaptation and food security interventions. We are kind of a national level organization with almost a physical reach in almost all parts of the country through our dioceses in our church structure. And we also are a member of various national level networks, including the Council for Non-Governmental Organizations in Malawi, the Civil Society Agricultural Network, and the Malawi Vulnerability Assessment Committee, which leads in terms of trying assessing environmental impacts and vulnerabilities across various communities. And we are also part of the Civil Society Network on Climate Change, which is also a network that is leading in terms of the dialogue in around loss and damage. So CADICOM at the national level has really played a significant role in trying to mitigate impacts of climate change, but at the same time, bring a voice in around loss and damage. So among its key partners, obviously, the Scottish International Aid, Catholic International Aid Fund, TROCA, and other Caritas partners across the globe. With the key partners, Norwegian and Danish Church Aid are some of the key partners that we have and obviously implement together programs and even support each other in designing. Having said about that, what would also be critical for people to understand is just an overview in terms of the social protection programming or situation in Malawi. Suffice to say that Malawi is an agro-based economy with the majority depending on agriculture. I think it is important to note that over 50%, I think to be precise, should be around 50.7% of Malawians are living below the poverty line. And of this, we also have another 25% that cannot meet their daily foods. And within that, we should also note that there's another 10% within the 25, but there's another 10% that literally do not have land and assets. So this is just to give you a picture in terms of people that would need social protection interventions. So as at the moment, we have about 5 social protection programs. Social cash transfer is one, which is supporting over 1 million people as at the moment, being implemented across almost all the districts, 27, but of course, the majority of which is supported by international aid. The government is particularly funding the social cash. We also have climate enhanced public works program. That's another social cash transfer program. We also have microfinance programs and school feeding programs. So all these are some of the social protection interventions that we have in the country, and some of which CARICOM and partners are complementing the efforts of the government to support. I think before I talk about the extent of the food crisis, I think I should be quick to mention that people would wonder why, if the government, or there are also already these existing cash transfer programs, why then the need for more? So people should understand that, like as at the moment, the program that CARICOM is implementing is what would call a cash plus intervention. So it complements other existing interventions in acknowledgement of the fact that whilst people are already in, they already need help, and maybe they are supported by cash transfers, but then they are also hit with upcoming events, emerging events, detrimental events, and then they would need even an extra support because they are even becoming more vulnerable. So hence the support. In terms of the extent of
Richard, can I ask you just to take 1 more minute to wrap up, and there will also be time if there's anything you've not said in the Q&A, but 1 more minute for the presentation if that's possible. Thank you.
Great. All right, great. So in terms of the extent of the food crisis, around 4.4 million people are estimated to be affected by hunger. So in response to that, the government is already implementing other food support programs supported by the WFP. But of course, zeroing into our support with support from the Scottish government through SCIAF, we are supporting a cash transfer program to reach about 4,520 households in 9 districts, whose selection has depended on the vulnerability assessment reports. So each household is going to be receiving around 46 pounds, which is an equivalent of about 100,000 kwacha. So on the right of my slide is just one of the articles that has been produced with regards to the program that we are implementing. The merits of this is that at least it gives freedom to what to prioritize depending on the varying needs of the beneficiary households. It reduces operational costs in terms of food procurement and distribution. And obviously it ensures dignity among the beneficiaries, and also it promotes local economy for the vendors. So these are some of the merits. So as we are talking, we also have emerging issues. So the emerging issues obviously are now demand for more support, because the extent of the need is just so much, is too much relating to what we are able to support. And communities also are succumbing to effects of El Nino, which is taking out also the little hope. So these are some of the emerging issues that we have to, somehow consider more support with regards to improving their production. And the series of floods have already destroyed crops, household assets, and livestock. And new needs are obviously shelter, clothes, and wash-related non-food items. On the right of the slide, you can see that's one of the areas that we are providing the food. The cash transfers, but it's already hit by this kind of floods in the last week. This is in Kota. So you could already see that we are trying to support the cash transfers, but then there are also other emerging concerns. Otherwise, thank you very much. That's what I wanted to submit to this group. Thank you.
Fantastic, Zikomo Kwambiri. Thank you, Richard. That was an excellent presentation to kick us off. I think you've made a really clear and compelling case for the effectiveness of cash transfers, but you've also helped demonstrate, I think, a clear picture of the state of the vulnerability and existing social protection frameworks within Malawi, which is really helpful as we get going. So thank you. Remember, anyone, if you have questions for Richard, you can write them down to yourself or you can write them in the chat now, and you'll have the opportunity after all of the speakers to ask those questions. So next up, we have Gertrude Siame from Caritas Zambia. Gertrude is the program specialist for livelihoods and climate change for Caritas Zambia. She is an expert in food and agriculture and follows those negotiations at the UNFCCC level. But she's also has a deep experience of community-led approaches, participatory approaches, including conscientization and training for transformation tools, which makes her well placed to reflect on how to do locally led projects via cash transfers. So Gertrude is working on the Scottish Government's humanitarian emergency funded programme in Kabwe and Mongu in Zambia, which also does include elements of cash transfers. So I'll pass over to you, Gertrude, for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. And allow me just to share my screen. Thank you. I guess you're able to see my screen now.
Yeah, we can see the files. I think you just need to open up the PowerPoint. At the moment, I just see the files.
What about like this?
No, it's not showing the slides.
Oh. Let me end.
Sure. If you just want to try one more time, if there's a problem,
Exactly.
I can share your slides if need be.
What about like this?
Yes, that's perfect. So when you click the button to present, then you're ready to go.
Okay, so having been shared on your end, from your end, you seem not to be rolling the slides.
Okay, sure, no problem. Let me do that.
Yeah.
So I hope everyone can see the slides. Moment. Okay, great. Okay, over to you, Gertrude.
So thank you so much, Ben. The presentation will look at the introduction, the approaches that were used in arriving at the community needs. Also the cash transfer implementation, the challenges that we experienced, including the complementary activities to cash transfer and the conclusion. We move to the next slide. So the cash transfer is being piloted in Kabwe district and also in Mongu, but for this presentation, we'll concentrate more in Kabwe because it was badly hit in 2022-2023 rain season with the floods and also droughts. But currently, the communities are experiencing the prolonged dry spell, which has actually led to crops drying and also poor germination of crops, including stunted growth. Next. So due to floods, we had some communities like the Domingo community that was destroyed in terms of had their bridge destroyed, and also community members had problems to actually access health services, including children going to school. They could not easily cross this stream that you are able to see in the picture, because most of the time during the flooding period, it was over flooded and children were unable to go to school because the bridge, as you can see, it's just too low, almost at the same level with the stream. Next. Approaches that were used in arriving at the community needs was that we worked closely with Caritas Kabwe to engage with community members using participatory tools that allowed them actually to reflect deeply on what is happening in terms of the problems that they are facing. It was identified that the biggest problem was hunger, but they had also to engage further into discussions to identify the root causes, which was identified that it is because of the crop failure, which is as a result of the drought and also the floods that community members do experience. So with the discussions, community members opted to be given cash and not relief food because they felt that relief food is some kind of prescribed too much by the people who are giving the help, and they don't have the independence to choose what they would want on a daily basis. And therefore, that's why they felt if they were to engage in cash transfer, it will give them the independence for them to be able to identify the needs that they need to address on a daily basis. Next. So this is how we opted to engage into cash transfer, implementation, and the supports that were given from SCIF. We started targeting 300 households, and out of 300 households, that is in 14 villages, we have 60% as women. As you know, most of the time, women are the most affected and the children. And each household is being given 400 per month. That was since January 2024. What they are using these funds is that they are buying food. This is mealie meal, relish, cooking oil, salt, and also bathing soap. They've also extended the support to the school-going children, where they're using the money to buy books for school-going children, to buy shoes, to buy uniforms, and also pens and pencils. One would wonder to say, but how come the 400, which is almost like $16 plus, can it actually help for them to reach out to the children and support them with their needs? It's because when they buy food, like let's say mealie meal, that mealie meal does not finish within a month. And this is why we saw that for sure, for them to demand to be given cash transfer, it helped them to be planning very well, as opposed to if we were to be giving them food, we're going to be giving them something that they already have. Next. So those are just pictures that are giving evidence on the process that we follow when giving the cash. We have to register a beneficiary in the book, and also the beneficiary has to sign to give evidence that actually the money went to the intended beneficiary. Next. The challenges that we experience are that not all community members actually do have funds for them to be getting the cash transfer direct into their funds. But this is the thing which forced us to be giving them direct cash. And also recently, even if the community members, all of them had funds, recently our government increased the tax on each cash that is being sent. The government has to deduct, and also when receiving that fund, it will be deducted. So which meant that farmers were going to be receiving less than the 400 which was budgeted for, hence the budget deficit. Next. We are not only giving the cash, but also we thought of looking at a more long-term interventions that would help community members to remain being sustained in terms of finding means on how to survive. The fact that this project is only for 3 months and it will be ending this month. So we also thought of engaging further with the community members who said they needed to go into restocking, and they selected goats because they said goats were prolific and they were a little bit resistant to most of harsh conditions. Apart from that, they can browse, at least even if there's no too much rain, they can still survive. And looking at the infestation of diseases, they don't get so much affected compared to the other type of livestock, which makes it very cheap for them to keep. And also, we introduced the kitchen gardens, which is helping them with the supply or easy access to vegetables. And why kitchen gardens? It's because kitchen gardens actually do not require a lot of water. In the presence of drought, you find that most water points have dried, but with the kitchen garden, they use the same water from the kitchen after washing their plates. Instead of just throwing the water anyhow, going to waste, they use it to water their crops. And looking beyond and also effects of climate change regarding the different practices of agriculture, we are promoting the use of sustainable organic farming where farmers are using the manure and also using the basins so that in a way they maintain the fertility soil. And as a way also complementing to the restocking of the livestock to see that there is connection with the livestock and also their farming practices. Next. In conclusion, cash transfer has so far proven to be very effective as a way of responding to loss and damage effects because beneficiaries are given power to identify what they want. And also it has brought out this aspect of family unity because when we give them the funds or the money, the 400, no individual sits alone to plan. They sit as a family to plan. In a way, it is promoting the family unity. Apart from that, it is also helping the children to know the importance of planning together. Because tomorrow, even if parents are not there, children will still be able to plan on their own on a daily basis, monthly basis, because the needs that they have actually differ from time to time, as opposed to when we were going to be giving them the relief food. Thank you so much. That was the short presentation.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gertrude. That was a really excellent overview of the situation in Zambia and the work that you're doing. I think what I'm taking away from your presentation is how such a small amount of money can really have such a large impact on these communities who are living day by day and affected so much by climate change now, as if life wasn't hard enough before the climate started to get worse. So I have some questions I think I would like to ask more about your work, but I will save them until the end. So next I'm going to pass on to Yvonne Namala, who is the Programs Director for Give Directly in Malawi. Yvonne has an extensive background in community-led development work in Malawi with Give Directly and formerly with Christian Aid, I think, with an emphasis on health and energy. And at COP28, the Scottish Government announced £1 million to Give Directly for loss and damage initiatives. And so Yvonne is going to tell us a little bit more about Give Directly's approach and how it links with loss and damage. So without further ado, I'll pass on to you, Yvonne, for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben, and hello to everyone. As Ben mentioned, my name is Yvonne Murindo, working as Programs Director for Give Directly in Malawi. Sorry. So as Give Directly, we send cash to people living in poverty with no strings attached. Essentially, that means we issue unconditional cash transfers for people that are living directly in poverty. We do this because we believe that people living in poverty deserve to have the autonomy and the dignity to decide how best they can improve their lives. And we believe that cash enables that choice. So to date, we have delivered over $700 million across different countries in the world, in 12 countries of operation. And we've also contributed to evidence around cash by engaging in randomized controlled trials. So I think my colleagues have spoken to Malawi. Richard spoke to it, the context of Malawi, which is located in Southeast Africa. He mentioned, of course, that 50% are living in poverty as per the national poverty statistics. But if you look at the international poverty statistics, it's over 70%. that are living below $2.15 a day, highly dependent on agriculture as a main source of income and livelihoods, and also very dependent, of course, on rain-fed agriculture, which puts the country at a great risk for climate hazards. And these have been intensifying over the years. The past 20 years, we've seen an increase in droughts and flooding, which have magnified in intensity and frequency. So in response to this, the Scottish Government, recognizing the role that they may play in terms of climate emissions, have partnered with Give Directly through their Climate Justice Fund to deliver cash transfers for loss and damage to people that were affected by Cyclone Freddy in Sanje district, which is in the southern region of Malawi. We basically aim to advance the use of unconditional cash as a climate justice solution globally, while supporting people that were affected by Tropical Cyclone Freddy to relocate if they choose to, and basically to reconstruct their livelihoods. This is the first project of its kind, we believe, that provides large unconditional cash transfers for loss and damage. And we hope that the results from this project will provide insights into the viability, the efficiency, and the impact of using large unconditional cash transfers as a climate justice solution. And what are we trying to achieve? We're basically trying to apply a value-based understanding of loss and damage by maintaining the unconditionality of cash transfers, believing this to be a locally led solution. And while maintaining the unconditionality of cash transfers, we understand that what counts as loss and damage is partly determined by how an affected community values and depends on it. So essentially, program recipients are free to spend the cash on whatever they value the most as they move forward on the path to recovery and reconstruction. With this program that we're partnering with the Scottish Government, we'll be reaching at least 2,700 households, 12,000 individuals in the southern region of Malawi, Sanje district. We are delivering large unconditional cash transfers of around $750. And essentially what we're seeing from the distributions we've done so far is that the recipient's main priority once they receive the cash is to address their most basic needs, their immediate needs of shelter. And this is what we've seen a number of recipients getting into as soon as they receive their transfers. Farming is the main source of income for most recipients, and they need, at the moment, they are needing the cash to rent pieces of land that they can engage in farming, and others will be resorting to waiting until the floodwaters subside and they can use the lands that they've relocated from for farming. So essentially, I think with the Scottish Government providing this funding, it is the most direct way that the Scottish Government can deliver its climate justice funding for addressing loss and damage, delivering it directly into the hands of these recipients. One such recipient being Joyce, who you see in the picture here, who is just emphasizing or exclaiming on how she had lost essentially everything that she depended on, her house being washed away, her utensils, the $24 that she had for a tomato business, but which she solely depended on. And she's lost that and essentially is looking to rebuild her life, starting with shelter, having a business and some livestock for a way forward. So essentially, if we're to share some key takeaways from this presentation, we hope that this program, essentially, we believe this program has strategic significance in testing direct unconditional cash for loss and damage. It's a demonstration of the most locally led solution, where individuals have a choice on how best they can address the loss and damage they have suffered, depending on their various circumstances. Cash transfers, by increasing the recipient's access to resources, we believe that this is a form of distributive climate justice. And essentially, programs such as this that are using cash transfers to address loss and damage build on a long history of evidence that cash transfers can be transformative and that recipients will spend well and locally, contributing to their own recovery as well as their local economies. And we have seen this with our other programs. Essentially, our intention as Give Directly coming in with the large unconditional cash transfers is to contribute to economic empowerment of the communities we work with in Malawi. What we're finding more and more is that we're working with people that are in the front lines of the climate crisis. And essentially, this is what we're addressing more and more directly. And they're using the cash in terms of just getting the assets that enable them to set up in a more resilient manner. They are able to buy livestock, which means that when they face a shock, they're able to use the livestock to rebuild their lives. They're able to build resilient shelters, which we've seen in Balaka district, where we had a Cash for Climate program, where a number of recipients were building back better and building back stronger homes that are more resilient to the strong winds that they were facing and the flooding that they were facing. So really, cash is something we're seeing as a locally led solution that can address the multiple needs that recipients face when they're building back from loss and damage. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. That was a really excellent and very clear, concise presentation. And I think you've really helped summarize so many of the benefits to cash transfers and how it relates to loss and damage, which cuts across all of the presentations today. Like Gertrude and our first speaker, Richard, I have some questions for you, but I'll save them till the end. So I think we can now then pass on to our final speaker, who is Philip Nyasulu, who is the Climate Justice and DRM Officer for Trokra Malawi. Philip brings a specialism in natural resources management and agriculture, but also more recently in community advocacy efforts, including within Malawi, and therefore his experience is very relevant to what we're talking about today. Trokra Malawi were the first organisation alongside SCIAF and local partners to implement the first money from the Scottish Government's announcement at COP26. And so that programme continues at the moment, and we have a lot of learning which has been coming through, which we've been trying to bring to the loss and damage discourse at the global level. So without further ado, I'll pass over to you, Philip, for 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. I hope you are able to see my slide. If not, please let me know.
Yeah, we can see it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So, if possible, Ben, I propose that I only spend 8 minutes on this presentation, and I'll reserve the last 2 minutes to my colleague, Connor Kerry, in case he may want to add a few things. So, my presentation has 3 slides. The first one, I'll be talking about the reality of loss and damage in Malawi. And then the second one, we'll be looking at the successes and challenges in implementing the loss and damage programming. And finally, Trokra's experience in implementing cash transfer programming in Malawi. And then pros and cons for each of the modalities that we have used so far. Okay, I'll not talk much about the background information because Richard did me really a good favor of providing like a well-detailed background about Malawi as well as the floods that we have experienced. Just to say that indeed Malawi has I would say examples of the reality of loss and damage. Here, for example, as Richard indicated that as you are trying to deal or to recover from one crisis, you end up being impacted by another crisis. If you check to your left, don't think that that is a river and then the bridge. What you see as a bridge, that's a stretch of water, which is now partly buried underwater. And where you see water body, some of the parts had houses which had completely been washed away, some buried underwater. You are right, you see that the kids are able to reach the roof of their school. So this was just like 2 weeks after Cyclone Freddy. You know, when you design, like in most rural areas, when you design like the houses, they are not of the standard, and even the height is not of the standard that is close to, is it 2.8 meters high. Most would be like less than meters high. So mean to say that if that's the school which is of the standard design, the level of the sand which were carried by the water reaches like the upper level of the windows, mean to say that most of the homes were buried under sand. And really, if you are trying to deal with the impact of the previous ride, and then you're floods, and then you're impacted by another disaster, it would be drought or floods, meaning to say that chances are high of the residual losses and damages. Residual losses and damages, maybe in simple context, would be those damages that cannot be repressed within the reasonable time frame, but also with the capacities that you have. So in Malawi, most of the rural communities have little capacity, and most of the measures that are put in place, they are to do with the locally available resources. As Yvonne indicated that on average, an ordinary household would spend like $2 per day. So that's very little, and trying to save some to try to recover from the previous disaster is not all that easy. Mean to say that most of the communities and households have really might have reached their maximum coping capacity, and may end up like now in indulging in negative coping mechanisms. In loss and damages, we don't only focus on the economic losses. Economic losses are those that you can put a monetary value. Most of the times when we are responding to a disaster, when we are recovering from a disaster, we mostly focus on the economic losses. Very rare do we focus on the non-economic ones. A good example could be like here in Malawi, should be the case with other countries in Africa, but even other Western countries. Graveyards are one of the areas that are highly respected. Floods might end up like washing away the entire graveyard. I doubt if anywhere in the world, someone had tried like to quantify the loss or maybe put a monetary value in a situation where a graveyard has been washed away, or somebody has been washed away by the floods or trauma. These are some of the non-economic losses that the loss and damage programming would try to look into. Let me try. Okay, yeah, so now let me share with you briefly some of the successes and challenges that we have experienced in trying to implement the loss and damage programming. The approach that we use is what we call the community-led approach when we are designing the loss and damage programming. And we use what we call the PVC, that is participatory vulnerability and capacity assessment. This is the approach that is approved by the government of Malawi, that is through the DODMA, Department of Disaster and Management Affairs. So this approach helps you to identify the capacities that are within the community. Sometimes we make a mistake by thinking that rural communities do not have the capacities amongst themselves. So now we believe that they have the capacities, they have the ideas, but maybe what might be limiting is like the additional skills as well as the financial or technical support. So this approach helps us to identify like what is it that the communities can do on their own, what are the ideas that they have. After all, they are the ones who are experiencing the disasters. They may have like the solutions through from the past history of the disasters. So from that, then we work together. Actually, we support them in designing their projects, and then we are there just to facilitate the implementation. So we have seen that when you are designing loss and damage projects, you are using the modified PVCA process, you really achieve the desired objective. So trying to empower the communities, but as well as trying to address some of the losses and damages that they might have experienced from the previous disasters. Two key challenges. I think you agree with me that sometimes we ask questions like, okay, loss and damage, what's the difference between the loss and damage programming and humanitarian programming? What is the difference between the adaptation programming or resilience programming and the loss and damage programming? These are some of the questions that we usually ask. But as I indicated that for loss and damage, we don't only focus on like the economic losses and damages, but we take a further layer. And sometimes like some would make a mistake of trying like to focus on the nature of interventions and not necessarily looking what is the overall objectives of the project. For example, it would be why are you implementing would be riverbank rehabilitation interventions in a loss and damage project. Riverbank rehabilitation could fit in a number of programming. It could be like in the mitigation programming, natural resource restoration programming, adaptation programming. But the focus, what I'm trying to communicate is that the focus should not be on the individual activities, but rather on the overall objective and see how the interventions help to achieve the objectives. And of course, funding. It is really of late that now I've seen like now there is like the operationalization of the loss and damage. But previously, it seems like most donors also were not very clear on the implications that might be there in case they fund the loss and damage programming. Who knows? Maybe they were afraid of getting themselves into liability issues. Yeah. So that's in short about the successes and challenges. Now, as I said, that the last slide will focus on sharing our experience when implementing cash transfer programming. We have implemented the cash transfer programming and using different modalities at different times. We have provided direct cash, non-conditional at the household level, just the way that Give Directory does. And we have also seen the very same benefits. It really empowers the communities. It gives them like the decision power. You know, sometimes if you are would be, I would say within the community, you are in town or anywhere you might be. When you have cash, it could be in your account or in your pocket, even if you don't say anything, but deep down yourself, you feel like, well, I think I can afford what I want to. So it really empowers the households. And the other thing is that it gives them like the chance to prioritize what is it that they would want to buy. You know, sometimes we make a mistake like in humanitarian programming, we make the decisions on behalf of the affected people. We'd say, well, let's give them food. Who knows? Someone might need like counseling. He might be traumatized. And so if you give them like food or blankets, that's not what they need, but you give them money, or maybe they might need like some medicine. They might need provide for their kids' education. So if you give them money, I think it really gives them a choice to buy what they want. But what I've noted in our programming is that if you give like cash to individuals, sometimes there's very little focus or any on the issues affecting the entire community. Could be natural resource management or riverbank rehabilitation. Of course, when it comes like to humanitarian response, like for us, there is no like compromising. It's always unconditional cash, because most of the times you target the most vulnerable, and these people might be staying in camps. So you have to give them like a non-conditional cash so that they should decide what is it that they want. We have also implemented cash right now, like under the loss and damage project that is phasing out like in 3 weeks' time by 31st of March. We are also providing cash at a community level, but also cash supporting the district councils, because every year the district councils and the community that work with, they develop the contingency plans in relation to the seasonal forecast as released by the meteorological department of this country. So we know that most of the times, like, yes, they may have like the plans on paper, they may indicate like if this happens, depending on the scenarios, this is what we're going to do. But 90% of the time, these contingency plans are not funded. So at the district council, we give them like cash. We call it like prepositioned funding. We just give them the funds. It's up to them like to decide what they want to do, but it should be in line with their approved contingency plan. The contingency plans are not developed by Troca, they are not developed by SKIA or Scottish government or any of our donors. These are the plans of the council. So of course we support the committee of the councils. Then we give them funding for them to decide what is it that they want to use the funds for. At the committee level, as I said, that we also support the committees like to develop their contingency plans. So again, we give them fund. Like right now, every community has been provided like $5,000. It's up to them to decide on what is it that they use, they would want to use this funding, but it should be nothing outside their contingency plan. Since they are the ones who develop the contingency plan, so these funds are managed by the community. Every community has the disaster risk management committee. Of course, like our partners, they would assign like one person, and then the district council would assign one person, just like to provide guidance, not to dictate what to do, but just provide guidance to make sure that indeed the plans that they are developed are well documented and approved at all levels, and the funds are utilized in accordance with their contingency plans. Yes, there are some successes as well as some gaps. One of the successes that we have noted that the entire community is empowered, and it motivates them like to monitor the implementation of each and every interventions and the spending of each and every dollar. The reason is that they feel like they own the money, and of course they do own the money. And then they would want to make sure that everyone is part of the process of procurement, implementation, monitoring, and then even checking the quality work in case they hire someone. Like to the right, this is one of the communities that we are working with, and year in, year out, they are being impacted by the flooding river. And of late, they have noted that the water would want to change the direction. So they're trying to strengthen the bank where the water would want to change the direction and affect their houses. The gap is that since it is provided at a community level, there is no focus or little focus, if any, on the need for the individual households. For example, if someone would want to send his to the hospital, the communities would be reluctant to provide like money for that household to buy medicine because that's not in their contingency plan. If it was on the contingency plan, yes, but in most cases, like household needs are not in any of the community's contingency plans. But also I've noted like relationships being enhanced amongst different households, but even amongst neighboring communities, because every community would want to be part, because even if the funds are not meant for your community, but if the other community is affected, indirectly you are also affected. So this is what I wanted to share with you. I think I've tried to limit my presentation to indeed 8 minutes. Let me now hand over to my colleague Kona in case you may want to add anything. That's what to Ben. Thanks, Kona.
Yeah, I think you've covered everything, Philip. Maybe just one point to add is that the project is an action research project. So as Ben and Philip has said, we're trying to garner learning and share it through various different forums. And also Troca and Give Directly, we're also coordinating closely in country to make sure that we're documenting the learning from both different approaches, so that hopefully we take examples from Give Directly and Troca, so that we can come up with stronger learnings more broadly for loss and damage programming. But yeah, thank you very much, Philip, and over to you, Ben.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Philip. That was a really excellent and very detailed presentation, which actually already answered some of the questions I was going to put to you and others, but also helped me think of some more. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to all of the speakers for such excellent contributions. We now have time for questions. We have about 25 minutes for people to put questions in the chat or to raise your hand for the panelists. So I'll just open the floor now for people to offer questions. So hopefully you know how to use the raise hand function, or you can pop a question in the chat. Maybe while people are thinking of questions, I will put one to you myself. So I was reading some of the literature before coming here that suggested that the cash transfers approach can sometimes create a dependency within local communities. What steps do you think can be taken to make sure that that dependency does not arise?
Yeah.
Who would like to come in on that one? So, okay, so I see Gertrude and then Richard, then Philip and Yvonne. So Gertrude, Philip, Richard, Yvonne.
Yeah, you are right. Sometimes it can create a dependence if the beneficiaries are left by themselves without any guidance and also without engaging them and knowing the reason why they are getting the cash transfer. If you just give it to them, definitely they will not even use it for the intended purposes, but they will misuse it, some go to drink beer, to buy clothes, and forget the children. But with the guidance and also journeying with them, using the attitude change tools from the Training for Transformation, it has actually helped other people to move to another level and become resilient as a result of cash transfer. It is all about the way we approach the whole thing. For me, it is a very good thing. It gives the independence to communities to decide what they need to do, definitely with our guidance. And it is something that should not be done within a short period of time. Because when you give cash transfer for, let's say, 4 months, you are actually only responding to the effects of a disaster. But if you prolong, you are now helping the communities to journey towards the resilience, finding long-term solutions so that they can become sustainable in response to whatever effects that they can come across with. Thank you.
Thank you, Gertrude. Philip, what do you think?
Yeah, okay, thank you so much. Indeed, it's true that other things that providing cash would create dependency syndrome. But I want to highlight that dependency syndrome cannot be only created by implementing cash transfers. I have seen some communities getting food support, and if you don't properly design your project, you end up creating the dependency syndrome. So I just wanted to share that it's not only cash. Now, how can you prevent creating dependency syndrome where you are implementing cash? Like in my experience, I believe that the level of involvement of the community would to a greater extent create or remove dependency syndrome. Like the way we do in our programming, we believe that we are living in a world of limited resources. So the targeting process, like in our experience, plays a vital role, whether the targeting of the community or the individuals. If you just go there and then target, chances are high that others might think that you have all that you have, or maybe more than what you have. And also like providing enough information to the community also helps. They should know like the challenges that are there. They should know that they are not the only ones who need support. They should be aware like the demand for grants that is there. And if you involve them like in coming up with the targeting criteria, they're aware, and then you agree like who should be targeted, and you ensure that the agreed process, I would say the criteria is followed to the letter. Definitely, you may not be creating the dependency syndrome. I've seen that in some communities, other community members, if you like call them like, okay, they need it, they wouldn't want to be put like they need. So everyone would want to be like at least up to a certain standard that at least he or she is able to feed for his households. So if you target the most needed, definitely they would want to use that as an opportunity to move out of the I would say the sector of the needy. Thanks and over.
Great, thank you, Philip. Richard and Yvonne, do you have other things to add?
Yeah, I think rightfully said by my colleagues. Maybe just to add that beyond the programming approach and the engagement of the beneficiaries, I think it's also good to note that the identification of the beneficiaries is also quite key in terms of mitigating the dependency syndrome. And the objective of the cash transfer has to be made clear to the different groups of people that are benefiting from the cash transfers. I would give an example. You see, the groups will have differentiated needs. There would be households that are ultra poor, and then they don't have capacity in terms of productivity. Maybe for those type of households, their social protection needs in terms of, for instance, relating to cash transfer would be their survival and perhaps a human capacity development within it. And then up the ladder a bit, if you look at households that are moderately poor, maybe they would have human capacity. So for those ones, what you maybe need to do is, as you are programming the cash transfers, it should be directed towards investments so that they should also be able then to do some small businesses, maybe some coupled with some linkages into microfinance. And also cash for food programs, because when you're providing the cash and then they in return, they're also doing some sort of work because they have the capacity within their households. So I think that in itself, in terms of the targeting process and the objectivity with regards to the cash transfer programs would also in itself be a mitigating measure toward for a dependency syndrome. I think that's what I would add. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Yvonne?
Yeah, if I may quickly share from our experience of delivering unconditional cash transfers, I think what we've seen with the large lump sum transfers is that people tend to use that or have the opportunity to use that to invest in longer term sort of assets and businesses that can set them up for positive effects for a longer period of time. And we do 100% follow-up of all our recipients. So once we send the cash to them, we visit each and every recipient to see how they're using cash. Quite interestingly, we see very little of people sort of abusing the money in a huge way or spending it frivolously. And we've seen some really significant investments, setting up of shelter, trying to get themselves food secure. So that is more and more what we're seeing in our work. And I think the evidence is also pointing to the fact that actually large lump sums cash sets them up for positive effects in the longer term. And I think if people are interested, you can go to our website and maybe see some links to other studies around this and what the evidence points to in terms of how people are able to set themselves up for long-term success and resilience.
Great, thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, all of you. And Yvonne, I think I will definitely go to check out the website after, and I really enjoyed in your presentation the depth of data that you already have on this. I think that's really fascinating and very helpful. There's two questions in the chat, so I'll put both of them to you, and then as each panelist can choose if you want to answer one or the other or both. So one from Max, who is asking how intra-household dynamics are addressed in direct cash transfers. Like, for example, like who in the household has the authority to decide where the cash is going, what the priorities are, and do you see any disruption to domestic power dynamics as a result of the work? And then the second question from Vincent is a technical question. Do you have any technical issues with regards to the delivery mechanisms that you could elaborate on? So two questions. You can choose if you want to answer one or the other or both. Who would like to go first? Philip, and then Yvonne.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'll take the first one, the power imbalance question, as the result of the household receiving cash. Yeah, indeed, it's very true. And from my experience, while working with program in different projects, sometimes the power imbalance arises. And because we're aware of this, that is from different reports that we have read from other projects. The approach that we take is that we don't just go to the community or maybe to camp and distribute money, even after conducting proper targeting criteria. We make sure that before giving out the cash, we take the community through protection mainstreaming sessions. Mostly, we target the local structures who are like the overseer of most of the interventions in the community. Like previously, we had what we call the village civil protection committees. So the village civil protection committees, they are like the immediate responders to any of the social related issues, could be like disputes among the households. We don't just go there without the knowledge of the government. We work hand in hand with the social welfare office. Social welfare office is a government office, and every district has a social welfare officer who is responsible for handling any disputes within the communities, or it could be like sexual abuse, GBV, GBV, any kind of GBV, they are responsible for that. So we believe that this really helps to raise awareness within the communities about what is good, what is bad, but also raise awareness on the available referral systems. Referral systems, in case someone feels like he or she is victimized because of support that we provide, they should be able to access like the services within the community or outside the community. There are certain issues that are very serious. There is no need for like a local leader to resolve, but then they should be referred to the police. So we believe that proper designing of the interventions, raising the awareness, ensuring that we mainstream protection at every stage of implementation, we end up like reducing or minimizing to the minimum the negative consequences that might come as a result of our program. Thanks.
Ben, should I go ahead?
Sorry, yeah, please, Yvonne. Thanks.
Yes, I think Philip has spoken well to the gender or household dynamics. I guess I can speak to the technical question on delivery mechanisms, but just to mention quickly, I think what we find is even with a household targeting approach, our recipients tend to be mostly female. And then putting in place, I think, an effective feedback mechanism is quite useful. Through our call center, we're able to get calls and feedback, and some of the calls are related to the household dynamics to see how we can work with the communities on that. But just speaking to the delivery mechanisms, I think for Give Directly in Malawi, we deliver the cash through mobile money, and that is the set mechanisms that we have. I think with the coming of mobile money, it's such a useful tool that can help us to get to recipients at the last mile. So even in the remotest area, people are now having access to, mobile phones and the mobile wallets. So this has been very useful for us. Of course, it does come with its challenges. One is the fact that these are people living in poverty. They may not have the phones. They usually don't. So what we do, for instance, in our case, which others might consider here, is to actually give them the phones. And the costs for us are costing only about $10. Something like that. And so we build that into our programming and design and distribute the phones to those that need them. And I think Gertrude raised an important point. There's also some of the fees and taxes associated with the mobile money wallet. And that's something I think you need to take into account also in setting that cash transfer. So I think we found it around 1%, for instance, of withdrawal fees of the transfer value that we're giving. So that's something that we also consider. Another key challenge, I think, for Malawi, national IDs are something that are a bit recent. So a number of people that we work with don't have the IDs, but you need an ID to be able to register on a mobile money wallet. So it's basically required that we coordinate very closely with the government, very closely with the National Registration Bureau, conducting ID drives, taking them to the communities we're working in for them to do the drives and get IDs to these people so that we're able to enroll them on the mobile money wallets and get them into the program. What we hope is that this actually enables them to access wider services beyond just the initial cash transfer. Can they have access to greater social services? Does that enhance their financial inclusion? Thank you.
Great, thank you, Yvonne. That's really helpful. So my understanding, therefore, from what you've just said, is that Give Directly, whilst your focus is on one thing, it's cash transfers. That's what you do. You will also do sometimes the additional work you need to in order to make sure the cash transfers are accessible to people, such as the distribution of phones, presumably the procurement and distribution of phones, and supporting the IDs. That's really interesting. Thank you. So I don't know, Richard or Gertrude, did you want to come in on this point, or?
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
Thanks. Well spoken by the previous speakers, Philip and Yvonne. Maybe just to add a few things. I think some of the approaches that we have used and we saw that they worked was instead of like giving them like direct cash, but we did vouchers. But then these vouchers were linked to our saver, and then we also have we identify vendors that would provide the various needs after a market assessment in those communities. So instead of giving the direct cash, but you just load the vouchers or the cards with money, and then they can use these vouchers and get whatever they need at an instant. So this, for us, it seemed to work very well in terms that one, the beneficiary, it doesn't have to spend all the money as and when it gets to the card. Sort of, it brings in a saving element within itself. Well, whilst at the same time, it also had a bit of control in terms of where others would want to maybe you give them money and then they spend it on alcohol, for instance. So this way, when we have this kind of vouchers, and then we are able to at least monitor what type of items they are being procured. So we thought this works well, but it really takes a bit of time and cost in terms of having the system so that you monitor all this. But it's also something that can work. But maybe if you are doing cash transfers for over a longer term. Another thing I think Yvonne already highlighted on that is with regards to mobile money and associated costs, and then the issue about phones. I think all these factors considered, for us, we had seen that it was a little bit more expensive for us to engage with some like the usual mobile money agents like Airtel, telecom networks, and instead maybe we were like prioritizing to use Mukuru, which is only charging about 3%, and then that's it, and then the beneficiary gets the amount that you allocate without any charges associated with them when they collect the money. But now the issue that comes in is with the agent, because now the agents have to be in a particular place for the beneficiaries to access. So I think it's something that maybe over time we can work a little bit more in terms of collaborating with these service providers so that they're able to have an increased coverage in terms of provision of the cash transfers. But obviously, I think we also maybe would need, especially particularly for programs that are in the longer term rather than the short term, because again, procuring of phones, if you're just going to do kind of a short or an immediate response program and then you procure phones for everyone, sometimes it also becomes a huge cost when you just want to address the immediate need. But if you're doing it for the longer term, then perhaps it would also make sense. So I think blending kind of these approaches would make sense to get pros and cons of this, and then maybe engage with the private sector so that we are able then to reach out in a better compromise to have an effective delivery system. Thanks, and out.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, that's a very good point, and makes me think. I mean, if this is going to be a key mechanism of distribution, say from the Loss and Damage Fund, or even if it's just going to grow for humanitarian needs as well as loss and damage, you know, how is the legislation and what is the role of the government in helping to make sure that those service providers are part of the solution rather than trying to profiteer from this emerging method of distribution? I think it's a really interesting point, and that'll be a big question for governments on the receiving end of such initiatives. So I don't know, I think let's move on. I don't know if you had anything to that question, Gertrude, but I'm going to do a final round of questions, and so you'll have the chance to answer it there. So I think there's two questions. So one is from Madiha, which is, with the challenges of attributing loss and damage to slow onset events, how can direct cash transfers be used in the case of slow onset events? So remember, we talk about rapid onset and slow onset being things like desertification, sea level rise, changing weather patterns, etc. And then I think Lena also had another question. Lena, do you want to ask that question now?
Yes, sure. So this is on the Loss and Damage Fund, which of course already has hundreds of millions in it, and we hope that this will increase in time. So my question is really, do you think that projects like yours are scalable to receive the level of funding we're hoping for, or should the support from the fund be prioritized elsewhere?
Great, thank you, Lena. And then I'm just noticing, sorry, there was another question which was in the Q&A of the app, which I don't have in front of me. I wonder if, is it Marie, could put that question into this chat, or unmute yourself and ask it here?
Sure thing, thank you. First, very inspiring presentations by everyone. I wanted to ask about the unrestricted cash transfer to household. Is there any criteria for selecting the household, like prioritization? I imagine that you receive a lot of requests. So what are like some processes or criteria that you use for selecting them? Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So therefore we've got 3 questions, and I'll give every panelist the chance to respond to 1, 2, 3, or all of them. So that's about slow onset events, about the Loss and Damage Fund, and about the criteria of assessing eligibility and needs. So who would like to go first?
Yeah,
Let's come to you, Gertrude, please. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah. In terms of the slow onset, I can give an example of the current situation in Zambia, which actually we are talking about slow onset of the rains. Let's hope it is in that context, the question, because most of the provinces in the country received rains after Christmas, which is the 25th of December. Okay. And then by the 20th of January, we had no rains up to now. So for us, the cash transfer was very timely. And that was at the time when we started giving out the funds to the communities, and it has worked well up to now, because we started in January with the support from SCIF, and it has perfectly worked well. Coming to the criteria, as much as we might be having people affected in one community, but others would be a little bit better than others. In this case, we're talking about the orphans, children, the old, and all those that do not have any means, let's say small businesses. So in our case, we went into the engagement of the community members so that on their own can rank those most affected, not affected, a little bit, and things like that. And the majority that we are helping are the people who are very old. And this is why maybe it has been even very difficult for them to have phones, because they don't know how to operate the phones. And also the children and the women. Let's hope I've answered the question. The third one, I'm not quite sure. I have forgotten the question, the third one. Maybe you read. In terms of scalable, yeah, very much. It is something that you can easily scale up. The current interventions that we are undertaking in terms of the cash transfer, because there are already some evaluations that have been done with the communities, and they were suggesting to reach out to SCAF so that these other interventions that they need to scale up in terms of cash transfer can be reached to SCAF. It is very, very, very much. It is still a priority in the communities where we are. Maybe just to increase on the number of households, because the current number of households is low because of the limited funding. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Gertrude. You certainly did answer the questions comprehensively, and I think what we're at the big level, at the macro level, we remember that the need for loss and damage is in the hundreds of billions, is what we say, and instead we got hundreds of millions at COP28 in Dubai. And so what you're talking about, and I think the scalability is so important, because we know that there are so many households who are not having their needs met yet, and will not soon, unless we see a massive increase in scale of finance. So next, perhaps I can go to Philip.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'll start with the question on the slow onset. In my opinion, I think the best approach to implementing cash-based interventions when addressing the slow onset disaster should be a combination, not a one-size-fits-all. A good example is in Malawi, southern part of Malawi. Is currently being impacted by El Nino, and the effects will become very clear from I would say end April, May, June, because this is the time when households will be harvesting. So while we do anticipate that this is what the situation will be like, but we have time. But we believe that there are certain households that are labor constrained, like the elderly, the sick, the disabled. These ones, like in my opinion, I believe that they should be targeted for unconditional cash. That is, if indeed we are looking at the slow onset. But those that have a labor capacity, since we have time, slow onset, it might be like after 4 months, 5 months. Definitely, if we design our interventions very properly, we may, on one hand, help the communities and households address their immediate needs, but at the same time, we try to reduce the impact of the disaster that is pending. On the targeting criteria, just to add what my colleague just said, I think what is also important is that ensuring that everyone in the community is involved in the targeting criteria. Like what we do is that we gather everyone from the community, whether he'll be targeted or not. After all, nobody knows whether he or she will be targeted. So once you agree on the criteria, then it is them themselves, because they know like who is living in their community and their status. So they'll be able like to mention, oh, Philip Nyasul fits the criteria. Then you write down the names. Then from there, depending like the numbers you have, you can deliberately, I would say, sample a few and then conduct physical verification. You go to the households with some beliefs from the community, because chances are high. For example, even though it's a community-based targeting criteria, assuming someone very powerful in the community stands up that will fit the criteria, others might be afraid to mention that they don't meet the criteria. So the verification exercise also helps, and we've seen that indeed it works. I remember like when we were responding to one of the floods in Baraka, we had to cancel like implement one of the in one of the committees, because we had sampled like 20 households like to verify. Out of 20, 18 did not meet the criteria. So we had again to seek guidance. So like involving everyone, then conducting the verification exercise also helps. Scalability, I think, as rightly put it, I think we have more needs than the resources that we can get. And all the examples shared here by the four of us, I think all the projects have the ability to be scaled. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Philip. And everyone, I mean, I'm noticing we're now at time, but I would like to come briefly to Richard maybe, and then Yvonne. But if you can keep your responses very, very short so that we can wrap up as people will start to have to leave. So Richard, do you have some closing remarks?
Yeah, thank you. Quickly, just to respond to these last three questions. I think in terms of the slow onset, I would suggest that prepositioned funds would also make sense for this, so that when we need the support, then we can use these prepositioned funds for the cash transfers. In terms of how scalable, I think one point to note is that we already have existing programs like the government program across the country, and with support from various governments, EU, Irish Aid, all those. So I think integrating more support towards these programs would make sense in terms of scaling up, while at the same time also recognizing the fact that the cash transfers that we do now are kind of a complementary support towards existing programs, bearing the fact that we are responding to an immediate need. Otherwise, I think the targeting, maybe I'll just add to say that the targeting also looks at the different types of needs. There are households that are going to be labor constrained. So for such kind of households, definitely the prioritization has to be done, because they will have a different needs. And then households that would have labor capacity, but perhaps they would not have productive assets. So I think those are some of the dimensions that we look into when you are also targeting the beneficiaries, of course, with the other factors that Philip has already mentioned in terms of the engagements of the communities and the various committees. Thanks, and out.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Richard. And Yvonne?
Yes. So first question, are cash transfers appropriate for slow onset events? Yes, they are appropriate. Essentially, what you're seeing is people are losing their livelihoods, even with a drought, for instance. And with cash, people are able to adapt their livelihoods, take up new businesses that are less weather dependent than rain-fed farming. So we've seen people really adapting, using the cash to adapt their livelihoods. So very appropriate to slow onset events. And then the question of, is this type of programming scalable, cash transfer programming? A very strong yes to that, highly scalable. And what we've seen, for instance, in our case, we've been able to use artificial intelligence, satellite imagery, to help identify affected populations at scale. We've done this in Mozambique, where we anticipate a disaster and are able to deliver cash to them ahead of the disaster, such as flooding, so they're able to prepare for that and be able to recover quickly from any loss and damage and potentially minimize that. Also operating at efficiencies of around 85%, which means of all the total costs for a program, 85% get delivered directly into the hands of affected communities, and the 15% would be what we use for running our operations. Last question on selection criteria. For this particular program that we shared with you, that we're working with the Scottish Government, these were internally displaced people. So they've been displaced by the floods. They can no longer live on the land where they are. And so working with the government and the chiefs, we were able to identify those people that were displaced and to work with them. For wider programming, for economic empowerment and for cash for climate work, we've tended to use what we call a saturation approach, that is sort of like universal coverage. First of all, identifying the poorest localities. So which are the poorest districts? And then in those districts, which are the poorest villages or localities? And then in that village, we basically give a cash transfer to everyone in that community. Why do we do that? In Malawi, over 70% of people are poor. And we found that increasingly it's difficult to identify who's poorer than the next person. But if you issue cash transfers to everyone in the poorest communities, we have wider economic impacts, and people are able to adapt, seeing as the effects of climate change affect them essentially as a wider community. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you, Yvonne, and to all the speakers for your answers and for your presentations, and to all of you for participating today. I think it's been an excellent session. I'm glad it's been recorded so people who couldn't make it can watch it. I'm glad that Molly has been taking notes. Thank you, which will go into the rapporteur's report for the whole conference. And I hope that you've all taken away many useful things from this. So thank you so much to everyone. It's been a great session.